With the release of Final Fantasy VII, the Final Fantasy series had become a strong household name in the mainstream, and Squaresoft's most successful game yet. As a result, during the English localization of Final Fantasy VII in 1997, the next entry was in full swing. While up to this point, series creator Hironobu Sakaguchi had closely worked on the series, he was taking more of a backseat as its executive producer to work on a special Final Fantasy movie, leaving this series firmly in the hands of Final Fantasy VII's director Yoshinori Kitase. And so, having already went about making a world of higher technology and machines for the past two games, Kitase was going to keep that tradition going, a venture to go forward on, and staying apace or even outmatching with what was declared as one of the greatest games yet. And so, through much developmental planning, large chunks of cut content, and a massive shakeup of the series' localization, today in the first of 3 parts, we shall explore the history and beta unused content of Final Fantasy VIII. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button too, to further support us and keep creating new videos. Having just wrapped up Final Fantasy VII, the team, with writing headed by Kazushige Nojima, wanted to move away from Final Fantasy VII's darker story, and instead be a more light-hearted one, as the team would put it, light emerging from darkness. As a result, with seeing reactions to the major death in the previous game, the rule was for no major deaths this time around. One major idea that came up was through the nostalgic feeling that the team had of when they were students, leading to them wanting to make a story that would take place in a school setting. However, the idea they very much wanted to avoid was making it become a school drama, which would be a contrast to anything in the series. So instead, it was stylized as a military academy, where students would train to become mercenaries. Writer Nojima was planning for the game to feature 2 stories, featuring 2 playable parties this time around, a means for both stories to take up half the game, with a story set in the past featuring a group in their late 20s with much experience and camaraderie, which would take place in the first half of the game, then a 20-year time skip, where for the second half, the military academy section would come in. Character designer Tetsuya Nomura further was inputting on the story here. He wanted to establish a contrast between both sides as a result. Being that the 2 protagonists were required, the characters Squall Leonhart and Laguna Loire were being made, whereby Laguna was being designed as a character who would be experienced and appreciated friendship. Squall was inexperienced and much more of a loner. To begin the process of designing the characters, long-standing series artist Yoshitaka Amano was brought back to draw concept arts of various portraits and characters based on the ideas being made for the characters in the game. Simultaneously, Tetsuya Nomura would continue his role of being the main character artist to do much as what Amano was doing by utilizing the characters' ideas. For Nomura, he this time had more freedom to draw in his own style, which branched away from the more anime aesthetic that was requested of him for Final Fantasy VII, and pursue a more realistic one. In Nomura's own words, they weren't really my style. Meanwhile, the role for Amano this time was to strictly stick to more concept art and not serve as a basis for making these characters. As such, Amano would draw a simple rendition of Squall here, dressed in all black with a blade in hand, in his own art style, which would soon be followed by Nomura basing the character's design on actor River Phoenix and drawing Squall with a more elegant design and long hair. But this design wasn't something that director Kitase felt would work for what was going to be this tough loner kid, and asked Nomura to shorten his hair, which in that spur of the moment, Nomura would even give Squall an iconic scar across his face. He had no idea how he would have gotten it when he drew it, and instead left that work to writer Nojima to figure out and incorporating it into the story, which would lead into him receiving it from his face getting cut via a gunblade. The gunblade itself in this case was next on Nomura's list of designs for Squall. Having a recent fascination with silver weapons, he wanted to make a weapon that would control differently, and thus develop this weapon that is both a gun and a sword. And in further drawing Squall, Nomura wanted to challenge the team that was set to make the FMV cutscenes of the game by giving Squall's jacket a fur collar to animate. On Nojima's side, Squall was being made to be quite different from Cloud, While Cloud was rather reserved and left to the player to interpret, here Nojima was writing Squall whereby one could hear his thoughts on any and all situations. On the flip side, in trying to keep up with that emphasis on contrast, Laguna was being designed more similarly to previous Final Fantasy protagonists, having a more open personality, ability to work well with others, and appreciate the bonds of friendship. Much as with Squall, Amano also drew Laguna in his art style in front of the moon, to which Nomura in his case drew Laguna similarly. The moon here had a significance at that time, whereby a render was soon produced of both Squall and Laguna staring at it in further reflection of their contrast. But in a story of contrasts, the contrasts were not just going to be limited to the protagonists, but as well as the main heroine and the main villain. The heroine being designed with the intention of being Squall's main love interest by the name of Rinoa Hartley. For this, Nomura wanted to create a woman who would leave a lasting impression on the player and have a cute appearance. As a result, a list of cute vocabularies were sent to Nojima to incorporate into the scenario. The idea of Rinoa was for her to be designed as more or less an opposite of Ultimecia, the main villain of the game, featuring light colors and themes as a result. Within Amano's illustrations, he stuck to a completely bright theme from an orange dress, blonde hair, and even angel wings, a contrast to his wild art of Ultimecia that had black wings coming from her and a dark dress. Nomura toned that back, which while keeping a generally bright appearance with a blue dress instead, also gave her black hair, while the angel wings were more thematic to her, from the back of her dress to even her limit break depicting it. As such, his rendition of Ultimecia gave her a red dress to oppose Rinoa's blue, while white hair was there to oppose Rinoa's black hair. In many ways, what you had was the rendition of an angelic character versus a devil-like villain. Rinoa herself was being designed as a light-hearted girl that would look out for people, while Ultimecia was being designed as a sorceress from the future with complete and utter greed, having an end goal to compress time and space and control all matter within it. Further along, Nomura had drawn Rinoa with a miniskirt as a means to keep her cute, but after complaints from female staff for how impossible it would be to move in that, he scaled it back. Ultimately, Rinoa was set to be the main love interest for Squall, with much interaction being planned to build up the story. As a result, Amano even drew in his own art style a rendition of Squall and Rinoa dancing with each other, something that was soon adapted into a ballroom scene early in the game. But initially, it wasn't just going to be a straightforward romance, as ideas were in place to make a love triangle. This being made with Squall's rival and major antagonist, Seifer, being made as another piece of contrast to Squall, and both being students at the same military academy. Amano's art of him very much drew contrasts with Squall's art, contrasting the background, poses, and hair color, albeit the clothing being similar to Squall's in what might have been an idea of them wearing a matching uniform for this academy. However, while the hair was kept as is, Nomura evolved that design further to give him a white trench coat, resembling those of Japanese delinquents, as he was being given the bully archetype to start. On top of that, he was also getting his own gunblade to keep up with Squall. And with that, Nojima had figured a solution as to why Squall would have had his scar, Seifer being the key to this, as the opening of the game was set to feature Squall and Seifer in a sort of mourning practice, whereby Seifer takes it too far and slashes Squall, something that Nomura would storyboard himself. While the love story was an idea that they were running with, a conflict with Seifer was him having a shared history with Rinoa, having dated her at least once prior, leading to scenes being written of Squall even being jealous of Seifer when he hears of that. The idea was ultimately scaled back to the romance between Seifer and Rinoa having all but faded and becoming only a two-sided romance story. Instead, Seifer was ultimately being written with the role of being tempted to the dark side by the sorceress Edea. Edea was a character that was being designed as someone who is under the control by the main villain Ultimecia for the majority of the game. In fact, a lot of it was becoming a game that was looking back at Final Fantasy VII and trying to be different from it, to the point of Nojima taking in fan reaction to the famous death of the previous game, as to not allow anyone to die this time. Edea's design in this case was one that Nomura decided to recycle here, from a scrap piece of art he had made for Final Fantasy VII, where she was said to be a part of, if not the head of a cult of Genova. When Nomura drew this, his goal with it was trying to replicate the art of Amano, by creating a rather extravagant design as a result. This wasn't the only scrap design that Nomura brought back, and in fact both Seifer's underlings, Rajin and Fujin, were designs from Final Fantasy VII too, where their roles were initially to chase the team, but scrapped once the Turks were introduced. But along with these, several cast members were being designed, as to accompany Squall on his adventure. These would include Quistis Trep, designed by Nomura as a desire for a female of any sorts to have a skirt, after Rinoa was forced out of wearing a miniskirt. As such, he wanted to give Quistis a miniskirt, but felt the long skirt over pants design worked better for her. While Nomura had drawn her without much understanding her character, Nojima had written her to be Squall's teacher, which surprised Nomura. Meanwhile, there was the co-student, Selfie, who was designed with an idea of Nomura wanting a character with an impractical hairstyle. Initially designed with overalls, but further with Nomura's obsession of trying to fill in that role of someone with a miniskirt, he redesigned Selfie's overalls to appear more like a miniskirt to satisfy his wish. Amano himself up to this point had depicted Selfie and Quistis in a style similar to much of what Nomura was going for, albeit Quistis was designed differently enough. Zell was another party member being designed as a rather over-the-top teenage boy with a face tattoo, along with spiked hair and a jacket. Within Amano's rendition of Zell, he lacked his tattoo and had more normal hair, as well as being dressed differently overall. And the last party member being Irvine, who Nomura was trying to design as a character that wouldn't overshadow Squall, and therefore trying to not make him too handsome. Instead, he gave Irvine a more fashionable appearance, complete with a trench coat, a cane, and goggles. However, as he was resembling others who had worn goggles in the series, Nomura decided to redesign him and give him a more cowboy appearance, which also saw him lose his hair braid. While creating the story and cast, the world of Final Fantasy VIII was being crafted. Director Hajime Kitase's desire was to have the game continue the trend of Final Fantasy VI and VII in being in a more modern day or futuristic setting, or as he would say, mix future, real life, and fantasy. The difference this time being that Kitase's desire for the game was to have a more European aesthetic to it, a means to give it a more foreign appearance. From grand cities being designed after France, such as Delling City, which received a direct archway in the form of the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, or Dole having been influenced by Rome, and in general, the game being decorated with general European design at every corner. In fact, this was already being reflected, with the characters having a more European appearance overall. Meanwhile, 3 military academies were being planned, being referred to as gardens, in a reference to the students who were being raised there like a seed. Which from there, art director Yusuke Naora realized it should actually look like a park or garden, and thus made them vegetative with large trees around too for stylization. And so early maps were drawn, featuring the locations they wished to make for the game. One major location here is in the eastern land of Esther and Trebia, a lot of which was being designed for use within the first half of the game, essentially where Laguna and his company would traverse to. A major point being both a former capital of Esther and a new capital of Esther, to which Esther was set to be its advanced futuristic location, in contrast to much of the game's other old European aesthetic. But in addition, other major locations were laid out for the Laguna era, including a battle of significance between Esther and Trebia taking place on a marked valley here, possibly being the war that Laguna and company were to be involved in. Further venturing north, has a lunar monster fall point that was set to be made during Laguna's quest, and even a Trebia capital city to be explored. All these locations and events for Laguna to be involved in would soon see a significant change down the road. Next time, with the game planned out, development starts on building the most ambitious Final Fantasy game yet, going through much testing and changing everything about how combat, presentation, and even FMV cutscenes are made, while also leading up to the game's grand reveal. Despite all this, the game might be a little too ambitious for their own good, which is about to lead them to cutting a very large portion of the game. So make sure to hit the subscribe button, for I'll plan to be back for more Final Fantasy and other games gaming history and cut content soon. Hit the like button and comment below on if you would have preferred the mono designs over the Nomura designs for the characters. So everyone, thank you for watching!